El Paso Elsewhere is a third-person shooter game definitely inspired by Max Payne and possibly also inspired by drugs. In this wide-awake aneurysm, players guide a man named James Savage through dozens upon dozens of levels to murderize hundreds upon hundreds of demons. Sometimes you get to stake the demon like you're Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but mostly you get to shoot the demons with 2 guns like Lara Croft. Within the first few minutes after the tutorial, El Paso Elsewhere fully reveals itself as a stealth hip-hop album release, pumping up the jams in the perfect marriage of music and bullets. I'm sold. Shortly after I started playing El Paso Elsewhere, and immediately after recalibrating my entire nervous system to vibe with these sick beats, I went back to Steam to see if the soundtrack was available for purchase. Lo and behold, the autofill in the search bar took me by the hand, walked me down the sidewalk, and whispered to me that El Paso Elsewhere is actually not the first El Paso game in this fledgling series. The first El Paso experience is a bite-sized game called El Paso Nightmare. This nightmare serves as a prelude to, but not a demo for, El Paso Elsewhere. I was intrigued by this nightmare, a game so loud that the title is caps-locked forever. And I thought, oh no, am I going to have to buy El Paso Nightmare before I play El Paso Elsewhere? Another purchase in this economy? On the other hand, which would be my left hand, what if El Paso Nightmare contains something significant, something revelatory, that would help the player better understand and better appreciate El Paso Elsewhere? What if El Paso Nightmare sets up something that is paid off in El Paso Elsewhere? A Chekhov's gun appears possible, even probable, in a game full of guns. What if El Paso Nightmare has deep lore? Lore so deep we can only get it in Chicago and only eaten by tourists. Even if that's not the case, and El Paso Nightmare is barely a prelude, sometimes a small thing that happens right before a big thing makes the big thing that much bigger. In 1992, Warner Brothers Pictures released The Bodyguard, a movie that nobody remembers but with an original soundtrack by Whitney Houston and a single that everyone remembers. Immediately before the final chorus in I Will Always Love You, there is a single, perfectly timed explosion of a drum beat. This one. Right before Whitney Houston annihilates the planet Earth, the drum beat catapults her safely into the atmosphere to observe the destruction from a distance. Without it, her voice remains the same, but without the catapult. Listen. It would still be a magnificent chorus without that one heavy slam of a drum, but it would lose a fraction of its power. I will not risk power loss. So yeah, this part of the video is about El Paso Nightmare. El Paso Nightmare is more of a prelude to El Paso Elsewhere than a full game, but it is also not a demo or beta. It contains no levels from El Paso Elsewhere. In fact, even though this nightmare is presumably using the same engine and assets, it's a different gameplay genre, or 2 different genres. Elsewhere is a third-person shooter, whereas Nightmare begins as a first-person survival horror with stealth elements and then switches genres to first-person shooter after the initial chapter. Nightmare also has a different protagonist than Elsewhere. Elsewhere stars a man named James, and Nightmare stars a man named Luis. The sheer audacity to make your purchasable prelude a different thing altogether, well, I'm impressed by the hubris. In the opening chapter, Luis is not carrying a gun. He's carrying an ice bucket on a quest for an ice machine that does not exist. This must be what hell is like. Luis cannot use the ice bucket as a weapon. It floats impotently, reminding the player that Luis exists while doing nothing else. Why does Luis keep holding onto the bucket even after being chased by living suits of armor sent by the devil? If this were happening to me in the real world, that's probably the point where I would give up and drink my Diet Shasta at room temperature. My ears love the sounds that the creatures make. Maybe these growls mean something to these creatures, an untranslated language. My imagination races. They must be saying, I want to eat human skin, because that's where all the vitamins are. The locked areas of the hotel are shielded by color-coded supernatural barriers that can only be opened by finding the corresponding hearts of the same color. I think this game just invented doom. Hotels are terrifying, and not only because you have to envision everyone who has ever masturbated on your bed. Hotels are horror movies by design, easy to get lost inside, and with few if any landmarks to show you the way. That is, besides the numbers on the doors of people you don't know. But you don't want to look at the doors of people you don't know for too long, because what if one of them opens the door at that exact moment when you're checking the numbers of their door to find your door? What do you say? Sorry, buddy. I was just practicing my arithmetic. Would you like some ice? A hotel room is familiar. It needs to be so that the occupants can feel at home. Carpet, dresser, a bed, a bathroom, but it is also unfamiliar. The infinite hallway stretching out for all eternity, dizzying, nauseous. And what's around the next corner? Either more of the same, which is exactly as dizzying, or a stranger, and we know we don't talk to strangers. Although El Paso Elsewhere wears its PlayStation 2 Max Payne influence well, El Paso Nightmare's first-person shooter section has that Nintendo 64 bulk buy chunk shot vibe to it. And I refuse to explain what I mean by that. As wave after wave of enemies surround you, the jank begins, janking us up to 11. El Paso Nightmare is as janky and torn up as every communist's bookshelf copy of Capital Volume 1, yet pristine, untouched, and brand new, like every communist's bookshelf copy of Capital Volume 3. What I learned about El Paso Elsewhere by playing El Paso Nightmare is that it's not a prequel or prelude, it's just a taste, but not even of the same flavor. Only a similar but distinct flavor, like the difference between strawberry ice cream and strawberry cheesecake ice cream. When I was finished with the nightmare, it was finally time to go elsewhere. El Paso Elsewhere is the story of James Savage, excellent name, and his ex, the vampire queen, Dracula. Like all big bad final bosses in a supernatural video game, Dracula wants to destroy the world and eat everybody's bones. James is a recovering addict who gives up his sobriety to pop pill after pill after pill to give himself the pep in his step to fight evil. I guess winners do use drugs. Each level in El Paso Elsewhere is a floor in an impossibly enormous building, and the exit is an elevator that takes James down, one floor closer to Dracula. If El Paso Elsewhere has a failing, it's that it is both too short and too long. It's too short because all 50 levels can be traversed in 7 or 8 hours, but it's too long because these levels are a little repetitive. There is only so much diversity in enemies and surroundings. Even the array of guns is pretty basic. This El Paso hotel is the border between reality and unreality, and it is haunted by the most terrifying beings in the universe. Biblically accurate angels.
Haven't thought about these since Sunday school.
I didn't go to Sunday school. I went to Catholic school every day and church on Sunday. I was drowned in the sacrament of baptism, cannibalized God himself in the sacrament of Eucharist, or communion, confessed most of my sins in the sacrament of penance, also called reconciliation, but kept my best sins to myself, and lied my way through the sacrament of confirmation. I was an altar server, and I hated it. I didn't even get paid. One day in Catholic school, I wrote a few mild cuss words in the blank spaces of Mad Libs and thought it was hilarious. It was hilarious. I threw it in the trash and didn't think about it for the rest of the day. The next day, there was an announcement by the principal over the intercom. Most of the staff of the Catholic school were not nuns, but a few were, including the principal. Sister Principal called me to her office. I had no idea what this was about. When I arrived at the office, Sister Principal had, in her hands, my crumpled piece of paper full of mild cuss words. My name was on it. She made me read the entirety of the paper to her, out loud. I don't actually remember how old I was when this happened. Anyway, after Sister Principal had finished her sworn duty of humiliating a child, I asked her how she acquired the paper in the first place, and she said that God was always watching. That did not answer my question. I asked again, and she said that a custodian found it in a routine search of a trash bin, but that only prompted further questions. Did the staff of the school habitually investigate the trash bins in every classroom in case there was evidence of a sin? Evidently, yes. My crumpled piece of paper full of mild cuss words did not hurt anyone, could not hurt anyone at the bottom of a trash bin, but that did not matter to Sister Principal. Sin is the harm we do to each other, but in the mind of Sister Principal, sin is whenever a child tells a joke to himself, does not share the joke with anyone who could be offended, and tries to get away with laughing. I was raised Catholic, but like all Catholics, I'm not Catholic anymore. The combat in El Paso Elsewhere is third-person shooting with a bullet time mechanic. When the target is over an enemy, it turns yellow, and when the target is over an enemy's head, it turns red. That's when you know you have a potential headshot. I started calling these red headshots red shots. Does anyone else do that? Create your own lexicon full of shorthand not stated in the game? I used to call dry bones from Super Mario World Bone Boys. James is not always easy to control. Trying to get him to leap in the direction I want is like driving a car when you don't know if it's in drive or reverse. You don't know where you're going, but you're definitely going somewhere. My favorite thing to do in the game is hurl James through the air and perform the ultimate warrior splash on furniture. Chairs, tables, dressers, everything must go. So what's so great about this game? 2 things. Thing the first, the music. The soundtrack is a combination of sick hip-hop tracks and horror madness by Lake Savage. Top 5 tracks, let's do this. Monster Club.
Just cause he black don't mean he a DJ. Just cause he on stage don't mean you chant what he say.
Break.
Pounding in your head's a motherfucker looking for the brainless sucker dark thing hiding in the mirror. The rupture is demanding, gun flash commanding. Get on your knees and break shit.
Ghostin' in the mainframe.
Little soldier boy flexing his guns, meme spammer tagging members of his convoy, looking like he's got front gate prime access, and he's just a man, so he wanna see those assets.
I want help.
Beast right in front of me. The only warmth that I see steams from his sleeve so bloodily.
And finally, blood pressure.
There's a lockbox in the tool chest. Brother got a gun, said the bullets go through vest.
Get your numbers up, boy, get your numbers up. Lay those bodies down, boy, get your numbers up.
Yes, I will get my numbers up. Thing the second, the mood. El Paso Elsewhere has more atmosphere than the planet Venus. In the first level, if you look hard enough, you will stumble across a room with an eager sub waiting for his dom. I lived in Texas for years, but not El Paso. I lived in Austin. The rent was cheap and the food was outstanding. Mexican food, sure, that goes without saying, but the Indian food was a taste explosion that burned my tongue to cinders. I was married in Texas, but I was divorced somewhere else. So we can't blame Texas for that. Austin is kind of in the middle, but El Paso is a city on the western edge of Texas, bordering New Mexico. I never visited El Paso, but I am familiar with their world-famous thick and chunky salsa. This container of salsa makes no sense. The red cap on top says hot with 3 chili peppers, but the label below says mild with only 1 out of 3 chili peppers. Maybe the existence of this impossible old El Paso salsa broke reality and gave us El Paso Elsewhere. Either that, or Walmart just kinda messed up, but that's not as intriguing. El Paso Elsewhere trades on its dated aesthetic to grab the attention of those who came to maturity during the heyday of the greatest 21st century video game console, the PlayStation 2. But is that all there is to this game? And why must we consider the aesthetic dated anyway? In the beginning, there was vector graphics, calligraphic projection that gave us such luminary and luminescent games as Asteroids. Programming vector graphics is like playing Connect the Dots, or so I am told. I am a player, not a programmer. Raster graphics are made up of individual connected squares, or pixels. Later, polygons flooded the video game scene with their unnecessary but still welcome third dimension, complicating the video game universe by the addition of this new, fancy digit. Beginning in the mid-2000s, but especially in the 2010s, so-called retro game graphics were repopularized by websites like Newgrounds and mastered by indie developers on Steam. Retro gaming commonly refers to playing old games, but a modern retro game is something else. Referring to the graphics in a modern game as retro is shorthand for games that use vectors, pixels, or low-resolution 3D, seemingly created to force the player's brain to jump to the left and do the time warp again, and again, and again. However, I am beginning to find the term misleading. I will explain. New forms of fine art emerge to reinvent and reimagine the world, but when a new style is born, the old style does not need to die. Surrealism did not end realism. Cubism did not prevent artists from painting landscapes. Postmodernism did not put an end to portraits. A style of art can become ancient, but never obsolete. Video games have different hardware than fine art, but are art nonetheless. Years ago, we all collectively decided to stop arguing about whether or not video games were art, solemnly shrugged, and said, "Sure, I guess." But there was a time when video games were seen solely as technological achievements and never as artistic achievements. Because of this, old graphics did appear obsolete. It's why Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog were given the gift of another dimension. I mean, who would want to play a 21st century 2D Mario game or 2D Sonic game, right? Right. If video games are art, then vectors, pixels, and chunky polygons are styles. And these styles are not confined to a particular time period, nor does the utilization of these styles necessarily harken back to these time periods at all. Film critics sometimes say that every movie is commentary on other movies. If that is true of video games as well, then every game is commentary on other games, but a game with retro graphics is not necessarily more commentary on games than so-called AAA titles with cutting-edge graphics. Sometimes, modern retro games comment directly, such as The Messenger, a game so far up its own butt that it has become an Ouroboros. But other times, the choice is more aesthetic than anything else. El Paso Elsewhere is a modern retro game in the sense that it has jagged polygons, but is that enough for us to think that this game's appeal is simply nostalgia? Does that mean that Tunic is also a modern retro game because it is lovingly inspired by The Legend of Zelda? Are the graphics what matter in this designation? Tunic does not look like it was made on the Nintendo Entertainment System, whereas the El Paso games are making more of an effort to disguise themselves in the fashion of a different time. Perhaps a game can only be retro if it could have been made during the time period in which the graphical style was most prevalent, such as when small development teams make a new game for an old console. El Paso Elsewhere, as it is right now, could not actually be made during the era of the PlayStation 2. Remember when I said low-resolution polygons? Well, these polygons may be chunky, but they are not low-resolution. I played El Paso Elsewhere in 4K, but I rendered this video in 1080p. In either case, that's high definition, and we didn't get Max Payne in 1080p high definition until Max Payne 3 on the PlayStation 3. That's just science, and history, and math. Some of the glow of El Paso Elsewhere simply was not present in ye olden days of the early 2000s. In case it is not clear, I am not complaining about this. It's a very cool look. I'm into it. But the true appeal of El Paso Elsewhere is that it's exciting, heart-poundingly tense, and purple. It's frustrating, but it's also encouraging. When you die in El Paso Elsewhere, the game does not tell you that you died like in Dark Souls. El Paso Elsewhere tells you, you keep going. I genuinely love that. James Savage's voice is a whisper, a growl, much like my own, but with more emotion. I have a deviated septum and a Baltimore accent, so I always sound like I am both suffocating to death and not all that interested that I am. I will always sound like this, and everyone can stop telling me that I have the flu. I don't have the flu. I can't breathe. I have been making videos on the internet since 2010, originally on a different platform than on YouTube around 2014. In that time, on at least half a dozen occasions, nameless strangers have asked me to hire someone else to narrate my videos. I never will. I don't have children, and my work is my legacy. I need to exist, and I care about my words enough that I need to be the one saying them. But much as I said in my previous video, nobody is obligated to listen to audio that they don't want to hear. You can just turn off the sound on my video, turn on the captions to follow along, and turn on the audio to some other YouTuber instead. Play Defunct Land audio over my video. Go nuts. Go banana nut bread. I won't know, and I won't be offended. You can do whatever you want, but that means so can I. Anyway, this game is good and you should play it. But this was not a review. It was whatever I wanted it to be when I started writing the script, and whatever it turned out to be when I finished. That's the new premise of my work going forward, and I hope you will all enjoy it and subscribe to my channel. I want to go back to making jokes like it's 2010 all over again, but this is not Retro Leon. I'm 1080p Leon. Nice to meet you.
There's a lockbox in a tool chest. Brother got a gun, said the bullets go through vest. Got those night shifts, so we sleeping too blessed. Grab the key, cause I'm about to shut some mouths, true that. In the back pot, creeping like they wanna see. Blend into the figure crime, rap thug wanna be. Want my numbers up.